This is obviously going to be a different tonal video than the other ones that I've made thus far. There's a big reason why I'm making this video, and that's because of Western coverage on the actions. As I've been watching it, digesting it all myself, I've been a little upset with how Western media is covering, especially the statistics and the events of what's happened in Gaza, Palestine, wherever it may be, and this one being the West Bank. There was the largest drone strike, largest missile strike on Palestinians since the last 20 years. If you're unfamiliar with the logistics, I guess, of the situation, it's really just a holy war between Israel and Palestine, in which Israel gets the funding of the military state of the United States and gets to blow missiles at Palestine, basically through the Iron Dome that is paid through our taxes, bombing Palestine so relentlessly that they don't have clean water. They very rarely within Palestine have electricity, running electricity. Palestinians don't have the freedom to travel and leave, so they are basically subject to stay where they are and be bombed. The average age of a Palestinian these days is, I want to say like 20 or 21. We can't necessarily hide the U.S. involvement in this. It's not going to be my job to hide the U.S. involvement in this. It is obviously going to be CNN's job to hide the U.S. involvement in this. Everything these news analysts are going to say is going to be pro-Israel. I don't know if you guys get your bingo cards out, but I'd imagine Hamas is going to get a mention. Even like the jihad is going to get a mention. I guess the best way I could describe this is like the Iron Dome has a 97% success rate at blasting Palestinians. It is something that our taxes are actively funding. It'd be like using and strapping together missile scraps against a military superpower as a 20-year-old boy. Things like Hamas and jihad exist because there's no government in Palestine. The government has crumbled in Palestine, leaving majority extremist groups or majority fundamentalist groups to essentially run and be the only people who are protecting Palestinian civilians, unfortunately. And a lot of this, I want to say, has even happened as of late due to a new batch of Israeli weapons that just basically got there, and they basically just used all that to create the largest military operation in the West Bank in 20 years.
Using drones from the air and armored bulldozers on the ground, Israel is launching its largest military incursion into the occupied West Bank city of Jenin. So Israel says the operation is focused on counter-terrorism. Palestinians call it a new war crime against our defenseless people. The Palestinian...
Obviously, that's terrifying, and what Palestinians are saying is correct. What Israel is saying is that they're going to be counter-terrorist, right? Which their opinion on what a terrorist is quite different than I feel like most people's definition of a terrorist. Their definition of a terrorist is 20-year-old men in supermarkets. Most people's definitions of terrorists are people with enough weapons and resources to, I don't know, maybe fight in Israel. If you look at Jenin, if you look at the West Bank, it's pretty rubbled in the Gaza Strip. Israel, over the last years of this genocide, has essentially been blowing up things like the AP building and other important government buildings. Israel has also shot important journalists like Shireen Abdul-Akleh. Probably fucked up that pronunciation. But not only do they shoot a very clear press person, but then they very actively destroy her funeral because people believed in what they're doing, and there are people who are Palestinian who refuse to give up, which is great. But unfortunately, Israel gets the support of every economic superpower, or the support of the giant military superpower of the United States. It really makes this whole thing a lot more complicated. The U.S. has had quite a dirty rapport with Muslim Americans, with Muslim countries. And I mean, if you want to look at like Netanyahu and again who we're choosing to fund out of Israel, they're really just as extremist.
Health Ministry says at least 8 people have been killed, with that number likely to rise.
Like this is another insane thing. Like this is what I mean about Western coverage. You're gonna say 8 killed, 50 plus wounded. There's no way only 8 people died. This is the largest attack.
Palestinians call it a new
Look at that. You tell me 8 people died, 50 people injured. Get the fuck out of here. That is strategically used, and I'm going to bring this up because I'm an English major, right? So I do understand journalism tricks, if it could be even called such. This is an extreme example, although not that extreme considering the circumstances. Nazis during World War II would refer to Jews as cargo, so as to dehumanize them and also not have to think about the humans that they're enacting the violence upon. It was a level of removal for Nazis to do the thing that they believed was correct, but was very clearly wrong. And most people had those moral dilemmas because they knew it was wrong, but they needed to change the terminology to live with themselves. Speaking of having to live with yourself, you look over at, there's, again, like, you could pretty much change that to like 58 people killed because they have like very little electricity in Palestine. They have very little water in Palestine. Meanwhile, Israel is flourishing. Meanwhile, the 20-year-old Palestinians who are being bombed so relentlessly, like almost like in Yemen, there's a man-made famine and a man-made disaster field created by people who just like want to burn and kill and see people die. There's moments where people in Israel are going up to like little outlooks in Israel, like kind of like clifftop sides, to see the explosions like they're fucking fireworks. Unfortunately, people are very happy that this is happening for no reason other than to restrict religious freedom in a nearby country. Whose land is whose is not even necessarily what I am getting into. If you want to look at it, Israel is blowing up a lot of Palestinian territory currently and slowly moving things into their territory. This is more about genocide than it is about land.
The operation comes less than 2 weeks after a raid in the same area erupted into a massive firefight, killing at least 5 Palestinians. We want to go straight to our Hadas Gold, who joins us now live.
It turned into a massive firefight. Again, the Palestinians that they're describing firing back, the reason why they don't give you the footage is because they're probably like throwing rocks, strapping together leftover missiles from the Iron Dome with like duct tape and like like anything that they can get their hands on. They don't have the brand new weapons that Israel has. Fighting back with quite literally nothing. It's just like on a scale without defense again, and like they're gonna say like the jihad and Hamas are the problem and that the extremist groups are the ones who are fighting back and doing this, and that. Those are a direct response to the fact that Israel's been doing this over the last 20 years.
Now, the Israeli military saying that they're going into the West Bank to try to prevent militants from being able to later carry out attacks, but it just seems to be perpetuating the cycle of violence. And we have been reporting at the Second Intifada when Israeli tanks were seen in the actual cities themselves.
Israel, a little earlier on in this genocide that they've been participating in, tried to like deny involvement. Early on, they kind of like would leave bulldozers or leave tanks near Palestinian territory and be like, I don't know how we got that there. Who did that? Huh? Do you guys know who did that? Would use that to bulldoze and terrorize their territory. Now we're just at a point where in Jenin, they're just literally like blowing up small markets, you know, and they're like justifying it by saying they're safeguarding their territory.
Hundreds of Israeli soldiers. The fact that they were using airstrikes from drones, we know of at least 10 airstrikes. Bulldozers that are tearing up streets on the streets of Jenin. Now, Israeli military saying this is being done to try and root out IEDs that militants place underneath.
Shut the fuck up. What IEDs? Even if there were IEDs, and even if they had the technology to be planting underground bombs, it's because y'all are coming out there with tanks and bulldozers, brother. It's not a chicken or the egg situation, bro. Look at who has what. Like, people love bringing up Ukraine and Russia as a problem in America, right? And I agree that Putin is pretty much equal to, like, Netanyahu in Israel. He just wants to bulldoze people who he wants to bulldoze and take what he wants to take. The difference is that we'll stand against Ukraine, but actively fund Israel.
The street, but obviously that affects the civilians who are living there as well. And we are actually seeing Israeli tanks, not in Jenin itself, but on the outskirts outside the city limits. Again, these are not scenes that we are used to seeing here. An hour, 2 hours or so, we're engaged in firefights with militants at a mosque. They say that they discovered some underground tunnels under the mosque that were being used to store weapons.
Again, these are all people fighting back. Brother, it's not a fair fight. Like, even what they're coming up with is like, oh yeah, we found a tunnel underneath a mosque with some stash of weapons. Again, those are probably left Israeli weapons. If any Palestinian has a weapon right now, it's because some Israel fuckhead was stupid enough to drop it. Or they have nobody helping them. There is no America to ship them off drones.
We're approaching now 16 hours of this operation, and yet still, the Israeli military is saying that it is not necessarily a large-scale operation against the entire West Bank. They say they are focused on Jenin, and that they want to essentially prevent Jenin from once again becoming what they call a safe haven.
They want to prevent Jenin from becoming safe.
8 Palestinians have been killed. There have been some reports that some of them at least are militants, but no militant group has claimed them yet.
Some of those 8 are militants. So like 2 of them. The rest were 20-year-old boys. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, like these are all, like, fuck all of these people.
One Israeli soldier has been injured as well, but of course for the civilians there, I was actually
to go one Israeli soldier has been injured as well. Fuck off.
They today are saying this is something they have never seen before, or at least have not seen in decades. Now, the White House has said that they are closely monitoring the situation. They did say,
obviously, if you're white, take aside the fact that this is a brown country right now, because that's probably enough for you after fucking Afghanistan and fucking 9/11 to be like, oh, this is the worst thing on the planet. Fuck off for a second and just look at this. Or look at the AP building. Does that seem like terrorist organization to you? Does Shireen Abdul Akleh, again, I'm gonna fucking mispronounce it all the time, but does Shireen look like terrorism to you? Or is it more just like existence?
The White House has said that they are closely monitoring the situation. They did say broadly that they support Israel's security and its fight against terrorism.
Oh my God, and their fight against terrorism of being fucking Palestinian.
There is a concern that this will spill over into something much broader, that this will spill over across the West Bank. We've already heard from them.
Again, this has been going on since longer than 2002. Most of the alive Palestinians weren't even involved in when this started. I laugh, but it's so fucked. It like angers me so much that I'm like in a state of disbelief.
Our next guest tweets that the Jenin refugee camp is about 1 square kilometer and home to about 13,000 people. I mean, think of that. It's incredibly crowded. And she says targeting this camp from the air and ground puts all residents at risk.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely targeted. I don't think there's really any question about the fact that it's targeted. She basically had to acknowledge it, but she had to go that someone else said it.
Well, I can tell you that journalists have been struggling to cover the story on the ground. They've come under direct fire themselves. The medical crews, as you reported, have also had a lot of difficulty accessing the refugee camp and retrieving the injured or attending to those who need help, including the elderly.
Yeah, Israel is very strategically evil. They do these large military actions and then strike the resources to water, electricity, help. They're very actively blocking them from help as well. Literally genocide.
Elderly and the civilians trapped in the refugee camp during this operation, which is going on almost 16 hours now, is very reminiscent of that bloody episode when Israel killed over 60 Palestinians and basically pummeled the refugee camp, destroyed it, leveled many of its neighborhoods.
Refugee camp meaning these are people, civilians, coming together trying to survive. you know, it's not like a gang of militarized, and if they are militarized, it is because Israel is firing missiles from home. It's like the Golden State Warriors or like the New England Patriots playing like the Cleveland Browns, like the '06 Cleveland Browns, you know what I mean? Like I'm talking like Johnny Manziel, or like the Golden State Warriors playing like a G League team. It's just like, what did you think would happen? The G League team is gonna have to try. You think they're just gonna sit there and let you do this? No.
You know, it's hard for us to get a read.
Notice how it goes all the way up to 80 wounded just in the span of this coverage, because more people are dying, right? Those are killed people, but they're going to keep tallying the wounded up because, number one, it's still going on as this coverage is going on. But again, they're not going to tally them in the killed because there's no medical there to confirm them dead.
What's going on the ground? We have live pictures right now of Jenin. As you can see, as the sun is setting, we still see smoke rising from there. The Israeli government believes that this operation will continue for some hours to come. In terms of tactics here, what are you hearing as well, which I'm sure it's difficult for you to get information? The Palestinian Red Crescent saying medical professionals were having a hard time getting to those injured. I mean, give us an indication of operationally what this will look like if you're inside such a crowded camp.
A large contingent of Israeli armored vehicles have gotten into the refugee camp. They've basically plowed many of the streets. They've destroyed the water network, cut off electricity, so the residents now have no electricity, no water, and nowhere to go. And many of the buildings have been taken over by Israeli soldiers to be used as sniper positions. So those,
which we saw earlier, not to cut her off, she actually is kind of spitting right now. Again, like this is their backyard. Is this guy? You know what I mean? That's terrifying.
And I want to put this in perspective, if you allow me. For Palestinians, these horrible scenes are part of a bigger and very violent picture of daily life under Israeli occupation. The Palestinians are ruled against their will by the Israelis, and in order to maintain that rule, which is violent in its nature, Israel conducts these campaigns against Palestinian resistance, which exists because the occupation exists. As you know,
and precisely, the only reason they are acting in any militant way is because there is a giant military superpower constantly plowing and ticking at them.
Reporter was reporting out of Ukraine a few moments ago and was talking about
She's actually
efforts to combat.
And you notice this bitch is trying to cut her off as soon as she says that, but like she gets the Ukraine point in there. That's fantastic. That's so true. It's like we'll hear about Russia all day. This is a very large scale or on the same scale, but again, as she described, it gets no media coverage. Or when it does get media coverage, this bitch like this is just talking about Israel's perspective.
There, it's pretty much the same.
This is like the most I've heard about Palestine, really, and it's because they had someone from Palestine talking about it. What they're calling terrorist structures have formulated because, number one, they're bombing non-terrorist structures, and number two, they need some kind of semblance of defense because there's no governmental system.
Our reporting says that the United States Biden administration is watching the situation closely, but it continues to hold the line, saying that, look, Israel is entitled to safeguard its security.
Exactly
I also want to get to those calls from Hamas and Islamic Jihad to...
There it is. I was waiting for her to say it. It's a counter-terrorist revolution, essentially. Again, unfortunately, in a state like that with 20-year-old men basically running things and not even necessarily as a slight, there's no structure right now, so there's no education systems. There's no ability to get progressive thinking in Palestine because people are just being constantly blown and murdered while Israel flourishes and is funded to do so. So they're going to get Hamas and Jihad to talk, and then they're going to have them talk about like their fundamentalist ideals, which is just like, what are you expecting you expecting everybody in there to be like woke kings, and in all reality CNN is being fucking very not woke right now.
I mean, how much of a tipping point are we at here in terms of an escalation, especially, you know, all available means basically is a call to action for more violence, is it?
This bitch, by all means, or by all available means, is a call to action because for the last 20 years, a global superpower has been blowing up fucking schools and markets and like blocking any kind of medical help, shooting journalists who try to cover it. By all available means they're not going down without a fight because they're being boxed in a corner. I think very clearly if one person stopped, the other team would not have too much to do. Thanks to us selling weaponry to people in Ukraine, they're holding frame a little bit, right? Again, now imagine if the other people are getting our resources.
Again, I want to, just bring in the Palestinian perspective here. Being ruled against your will by a foreign military is violent, and it's violent every day, even when it doesn't make the news. The fact that Hamas and Islamic Jihad are now calling for reaction against the invasion of the refugee camp is predictable. There's nothing surprising about that, just as there is nothing surprising about the fact that Palestinians don't want to be ruled by foreigners.
Yes, and again, these people are not, what do you think these guys are like master engineers? They're taking things that Israel has left over. You know, it's again, stuff that was left in there. It's missile scraps from explosions that already happened, in which they're able to create those maybe underground things that Israel likes to be concerned about. The bombs that are in the road shouldn't affect you if you're Israel because it's in Palestine.
Israel has killed more Palestinians this year so far than it did the year before, which was
Right.
already the most violent.
We're halfway through this year.
The past 16 or 17 years. It has allowed for settlement expansion that has exceeded the total number of settlement units built last year. Is the most violent, most extreme, most anti-Palestinian that we've seen since Israel's establishment, perhaps.
These people that they're bringing up as problems, Hamas and Jihad, are basically the only kind of semblance of leadership in a giant explosion crater. Again, are you expecting them to like believe in women's rights and like I don't know, like abortion? You know, like no.
Is not just to maintain control over the West Bank, to annex that West Bank and consider it part of Israel, but also to crush the very notion of Palestinian freedom and statehood. So the Palestinians are not only under attack, they feel that their very existence is under attack.
So we will continue to follow the breaking news on this story.
Yeah, she has to move on. She's like, all right, let's go ahead and get her off camera. She's spitting.
That's the information we're getting. We thank you for.
This is disgusting. Again, if it wasn't a fucking personal thing, then why are you destroying a funeral ceremony for a journalist? Good, but go ahead and gather and sit through and watch the explosions. Act all cool about it.